Hey guys, we're in week number 4 of our salvation series, and we get to start this upcoming Sunday answering some of the hot topic issues surrounding salvation. We're going to look on Sunday at the question of, can a real Christian lose their salvation? Can a real Christian lose their salvation? And we're going to actually focus most of our time on why can a real Christian not lose their salvation? Because my guess and assumption is that most of our students know that a real Christian can't lose their salvation. I imagine that's something most of them have been told, probably have been told for a long time. They know real Christians can't lose their salvation. And I'm going to poll them actually at the beginning of the lesson to see if that's actually the case. But I have a strong feeling that's probably true. But they, like most Christians that I have experienced, may know the right answer to that question, but they probably don't know how to explain that very well. They probably especially don't know how to explain it very well from Scripture. Why is it true that real Christians can't lose their salvation? Most Christians, I think, really struggle to give you an in-depth answer to that, and there's some real problems created if we don't actually know how to answer that question with some more depth than just, no, a real Christian cannot lose their salvation. We got to have more than that. And hopefully throughout the lesson and discussion questions, we'll see why that's so important. You guys have a pretty simple discussion group, especially for this series, which has had some complicated lessons and discussion groups. First, you're going to start out with the question we've been trying to start all of the discussion groups in this series with: what stood out to you? Do you have any questions? Do you disagree with anything? Is there anything that was unclear to you? Anything you need to rehash or hear again? Make sure your students understand what was taught and have any of their questions answered before you move on. That's the most important thing. We really want to make sure that happens. So if you have to spend your whole time answering their questions, that's totally fine. If they don't have any questions, you can move on. Question number 2 is, have you ever had a discussion or a debate with someone about this topic? So have you ever had a discussion about, can a real Christian lose their salvation? Maybe they've asked their parents this in the past. Maybe they've asked a pastor. Maybe they asked another Christian. Or maybe a Christian asked them, or a non-Christian asked them, and they had to try to answer this question. See if your students have any experience with that, and then poke around about, how did that go? Did you answer the question well, or did the other person answer it well? What was helpful? What was unhelpful? What aligns with kind of what we just talked about, and maybe what doesn't? So just have a discussion on that if you have students that have experienced that before. Question number 3 is, why is it so important that we don't just know that Christians can't lose their salvation, but we also know why real Christians can't lose their salvation? So why is the why so important? There's lots of answers to this question. I've given you a couple there underneath question 3. I'm sure if you dwell on this for a couple of minutes before Sunday morning, you'll be able to think of some yourself, but we want students to understand why this is so important. Not just that we know the answer, the right yes or no answer, but that we actually know an explanation of why that is the case. Question number 4 and 5 really flesh out further question number 3. They should make it more obvious as to why this is really important. And they go on opposite ends of the spectrum. Question number 4 is, what problem do we create if we just blankly tell people that they can't lose their salvation? So if that's all the information we give, if someone comes and asks us, can a real Christian lose their salvation, and all we have to say is, no, a real Christian can't lose their salvation, even if we take Bible verses and support that, because there are many that support that because it's true, if that's all we give people, we can create problems. The main problem you're going to create is you're going to make people that don't think it's important how you live after you're saved. That's an obvious implication of answering the question, can a real Christian lose their salvation, with a negative, saying no, a real Christian can't lose their salvation. A natural implication from that is, then it doesn't matter what I do after I'm saved. I can just do whatever I want. There's a lot of people that think that, so we have to give them more. And we're going to try to do that on Sunday. Opposite end of the spectrum, there are people that would say, we can blankly tell people that real Christians, true Christians, are going to look like Christians. They're going to grow more and more like Jesus, and if you're not doing that, you're not actually a Christian. That's also mostly true. There's also many verses in Scripture that you can use to support that idea. But if that's all that we give people, if someone comes up to us and says, can you lose your salvation as a real Christian? And we say, real Christians are going to look like real Christians. And when they don't, they show that they aren't actually Christians. When we do that, we kind of undermine any assurance of salvation that people could have. And people are going to think that salvation depends on them, that it's something that's not fully secured yet. It's something that can be lost if they don't act correctly. It's something that can be earned if they do behave correctly. Obviously, both of those ideas are wrong. We don't want either of those ideas flourishing in Christians or in our churches. So we need to give them more than that. The argument that I'm going to make at the beginning of our lesson is that most people know both of those ideas, and that's all they know to try to answer this question. So if someone comes up and asks the average Christian if someone can lose their salvation, most Christians will say no, they can't lose their salvation. But if you really press that person with an example of someone who says that they're saved but looks nothing like a Christian, has no connection to the church, they're living in open sin, that person will also say, yeah, that person is not a real Christian. And there's nothing that most Christians have to tie those two ideas together. Question number 4 and question number 5, they're both true ideas. They're both things that can be supported from Scripture, but we need some more to fill in the gaps between those two, and that's what we're going to try to provide on Sunday. If that doesn't make any sense to you, just wait for the first 5 minutes on Sunday, and you'll hopefully understand that better. After you go through question 4 and 5, have a brief 1-minute teaching moment that you just blankly make sure that you say this, because this is important. That our students understand that we're kind of diving deep here into some nuances and some complexities to answer these questions. And we're not doing that just because these are fun additions to our knowledge, just to make us smarter Christians. These are really, really important, essential things that protect ourselves and protect other people from really dangerous beliefs about Christianity. So these are not just useless facts. These are not just things to puff up our knowledge with. These are things that should protect us and protect other people from really dangerous pitfalls that lots of Christians fall into on one side or on the other. If you have time left, again, as always, you don't need to rush through all of the questions. If you don't get to the last one, that's totally fine. If you only make it to question 2 or 3, that's totally fine. I'm trying to give you more than enough to fill that 15 to 20 minutes with. Question number 6 is just testing your students. Can you guys think of any verses in Scripture that make it really clear that Christians can't lose their salvation? If someone asked you, can you lose your salvation, and you said no, and they said, prove it to me from the Bible, what verses would you go to? Or do you have a go-to verse? Test your students. They don't have to know the reference. They don't have to know the exact quote, but see if they know any verses that would indicate that. If not, I've got 3 obvious, easy, simple ones to memorize here. Pick 3 students, have them look those up and read those just to give a little defense of the obvious truth from Scripture that true Christians cannot lose their salvation. Be a good way to close your time if you have the extra minutes. All right, let me know if you guys have questions. Thank you for your service. See you guys on Sunday.